I came to Christmas dinner, but Mom said, "You're a leech. Get out." The words cut sharper than the cold outside. I had walked into that house with a smile, holding on to a tiny bit of hope that tonight would feel like family again. The tree glowed in the corner, stockings lined the mantel, and the smell of roasted ham filled the room. For the first time all year, I thought maybe I could sit at the table and not feel like a burden. I slipped into my seat, trying to blend in, trying to enjoy the laughter that bounced around the table. Plates were passed, glasses clinked, and for a moment, I let myself believe I belonged. Then Mom's eyes found mine. They weren't warm. They were sharp, heavy, searching for a target. "You know what?" she said suddenly, her fork clinking against her plate. The room went quiet. "You're nothing but a leech. You take and take, but you never give anything back. What have you even done for this family?" My breath caught in my throat. I froze, heat rushing to my face. Every relative's eyes slid toward me, some wide, some avoiding mine altogether. My plate sat untouched in front of me, and my hands trembled beneath the table. I just wanted to spend Christmas with everyone," I whispered, my voice barely there. "Christmas with everyone?" Mom snapped. "Do you even hear yourself? You've done nothing this year. Not one thing. And you sit here like you've earned a seat at this table. You don't deserve it." A nervous laugh came from the far end of the table, but no one stopped her. No one said a word in my defense. My brother stared at his plate. My cousin coughed into his napkin. I felt smaller with every second that ticked by, shrinking under the weight of her words. I looked down at the food, the ham glistening under the lights, the potatoes piled high, and suddenly it all looked strange, foreign, like it didn't belong to me. Maybe I didn't belong either. Mom's voice rose again, sharp and final. "Get out. Right now. You're not welcome here." Chairs shifted, silverware clinked, but no one stopped her. No one even looked at me. My chest tightened, my eyes burned, and before I could stop it, tears blurred my vision. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor. The sound echoed through the silence. My hands fumbled for my coat, draped over the back of the chair. Not one person reached out. Not one voice said, "Wait." The lights on the tree twinkled, ornaments shimmering as if mocking me, reminding me this was supposed to be a night of joy. Instead, it was the night my own mother turned me into a stranger in my childhood home. And so, with the taste of salt on my lips and my heart heavier than it had ever been, I walked out into the cold. Colton cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his chair, but he didn't speak up. His wife Renee smirked as if she'd been waiting for this moment. Victor glanced down at his lap, pretending to fix his napkin, and Uncle Harland only shook his head slowly, as if to agree with Mom. Not one pair of eyes met mine. The silence pressed down, heavy and cruel, until a small laugh broke it. Renee leaned back in her chair, her red nails tapping the wine glass. "She's right, you know. You really don't help anyone. You just show up." Her words carried a sting sharper than the cold draft sneaking through the old windows. I tried to steady my breath, but my chest felt tight. "That's not fair," I said, my voice shaking. "I lost my job this year. You all know what happened." Mom scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Excuses. Always excuses." My hands clenched in my lap. "He my boss, he made things impossible. He cornered me, said things he shouldn't have, and when I stood up for myself, I got fired." My throat burned, but I forced the words out. I didn't choose to lose my job. It wasn't laziness. Instead of sympathy, Colton let out a short laugh. "Sure. That's what people always say when they can't keep up." Renee shook her head, lips curved in a cold smile. "You're just making drama, like always." The sound of metal against china snapped my focus. Mom slid her hand across the table and pulled my plate toward her. She scraped the food away as though I hadn't earned a single bite. "You bring nothing to the table, literally nothing. Why should you get to sit here and eat like the rest of us?" My stomach churned. The smell of the food turned sour in my nose, making me feel sick. I wanted to scream, to pound the table and make them hear me, but the words caught, tangled, and only a broken whisper came out. "I've done so much for this family. You all know that. You just choose to forget." Mom didn't blink. Her face stayed hard, lips pressed tight as stone. "Enough. I won't listen to your pity stories anymore. Get up. You don't belong at this table." The chair creaked as I shifted, still clinging to the hope that someone, anyone, would speak for me. My eyes searched the faces around me, begging silently for help. Victor shifted uncomfortably, but never raised his head. Uncle Harland lifted his glass as if to toast, muttering, "She's right, girl. Time to face the truth." The air drained out of me. My throat ached, my hands trembled. I pushed back from the table, my knees weak under me. The laughter started then, quiet at first, like it was safer for them to mock me once I was already beaten down. I stumbled toward the door, tears spilling before I could stop them. My coat still hung on the rack, but my vision was blurry, my body moving on instinct. I reached for the knob with empty hands, leaving the coat, leaving the keys, leaving everything. The last sound I heard before the door slammed behind me was Mom's voice, sharp and final, echoing in my ears. Good riddance. The cold air slapped against my face the moment I stepped outside. My hands shook as I reached for my coat and dug my keys out of the pocket. The night was quiet except for the crunch of snow under my boots. My car sat alone at the end of the driveway, frost glistening on the windshield. I climbed inside, my breath fogging the glass as I jammed the keys into the ignition. The engine groaned before coming alive, and I pulled onto the dark road with tears still streaming down my face. Streetlights flickered past, dim and distant, the world swallowed by white drifts on either side. The road stretched endlessly, but my mind wasn't on where I was going. It was trapped in the past. One memory after another crashed into me, sharper than the icy wind. I remembered the envelope I slid under Colton's door when he couldn't afford his last semester of college. It had been almost all my savings at the time, but I told him not to worry about paying me back. He promised he would, though he never did. He graduated with a smile, while I picked up extra shifts to rebuild what I'd lost. The wheel tightened under my grip as another image surfaced. Mom, lying weak in bed after her surgery, calling out for me. I was the one who cooked, cleaned, and held her hand when the pain was too much. I missed work, skipped sleep, drained my own strength to give her comfort. She used to whisper, "Thank you," when no one else was around. And now she called me a leech. My chest burned as the next memory arrived. Late nights at the diner, apron stained with grease, feet aching so badly I could barely stand. I'd clock out at midnight, then head to my second job cleaning offices, just to keep up with the bills at home. I bought groceries, paid for utilities when they fell behind, carried the weight none of them seemed to notice. Snowflakes struck the windshield, melting into streaks of water. My vision blurred again, but this time it wasn't from sadness. Heat rushed through me, spreading to every corner of my body. The shame that had dragged me out of that house began to shift, twisting into something stronger, sharper. Rage. How dare they? How dare they sit there in silence while Mom tore me apart? How dare Colton laugh when he owed me more than he could ever repay? How dare Renee smirk after all the lies she'd spread? I gave, and they called me worthless. I pressed harder on the gas, the tires crunching over ice. My tears dried on my cheeks, replaced with a cold determination I hadn't felt before. I wasn't weak. I wasn't helpless. And I wasn't going to let them make me feel like nothing ever again. With the storm swirling around me and the road stretching into darkness, I made a vow to myself. This was the last time they would humiliate me. The last time they would treat me like I didn't matter. They had turned their backs on me, but I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The road blurred past as the heater hummed in the car, but my mind slipped far away from the present. Every mile I drove pulled me deeper into memories I had tried to bury. This night wasn't the first time my mother had cut me down. It had been happening for as long as I could remember. I was a kid again, sitting at the kitchen table, drawing with cheap crayons on scrap paper. I had begged Mom for weeks to let me join the art camp all my friends were talking about. I wanted it more than anything, a chance to learn, to create, to be seen. She didn't even look at me when she said no. That's a waste of money, Ale. You're not going anywhere with that silly hobby. The very next week, she handed Colton brand new cleats for his baseball tournament and stuffed envelopes full of cash into his gear bag. She bragged to the neighbors about his talent, how she'd do anything to support his dreams. I watched him wave goodbye from the car window as Dad drove him off, and I stayed behind, my sketchbook hidden under my bed. That was the first time I felt invisible. The memory shifted. Years later, I stood in front of Colton at his auto shop. His face was pale, his hands shaking as he explained the debts piling on him, the shop about to close. "If I lose this place, I lose everything," he said. I couldn't ignore him, not when he was family. I wired him $15,000, the money I'd been saving for a down payment on my own apartment. He hugged me tight and swore he'd pay me back. Months passed, then years. He never mentioned it again. Whenever I brought it up, he laughed it off. "You're doing fine without it. Don't be so dramatic." The betrayal didn't stop there. Renee, with her polished smile and sweet tone, played innocent in front of everyone, but behind closed doors, she poisoned people against me. I overheard her once at a cookout, whispering to a neighbor that I slept around to land jobs. Her words spread like wildfire, reaching relatives, co-workers, even old friends. People started looking at me differently, as if her lies carried more weight than my truth. She stole my reputation with a single sentence, and no one cared enough to ask me if it was true. Each memory twisted inside me like a knife, sharper than the last. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles white against the dark interior. Tonight wasn't an isolated moment. It was years of cuts, years of being pushed aside, mocked, used, and discarded. Tonight was only the loudest wound, the one shouted in front of everyone instead of whispered behind my back. The The pieces fell together in my mind like a puzzle I should have solved long ago. Mom's words at that table weren't just cruel. They were the echo of a lifetime spent reminding me I was never in. This wasn't one dinner gone wrong. This was the final straw. The neon sign of a roadside motel flickered against the snowy night as I pulled into the empty lot. My eyes stung from crying, and my body felt heavy as I parked the car. Inside, the clerk hardly looked up when I slid a crumpled bill across the counter for a room. The walls smelled faintly of bleach, and the carpet was worn thin, but I didn't care. I dropped onto the stiff bed and buried my face in the pillow, letting the tears come all over again. The silence in that room was different from the silence at the dinner table. There, it had been full of judgment, laughter behind lowered eyes. Here, it was raw, empty, and mine. I cried until my chest ached, until the sobs turned into dry gasps. Every word from my mother replayed in my mind like a broken record. Leech. Worthless. Get out. Hours passed, though I couldn't tell how many. I stared at the cracked ceiling, lost in the storm of my thoughts, until a sudden spark cut through the pain. I remembered the folder. The one tucked away in the bottom drawer of my desk at home, filled with papers I'd kept even when I didn't know why. Loan documents with Colton's signature scrawled at the bottom. Screenshots of messages where he begged me for help, promising to pay me back. Receipts for the groceries I bought when Mom's fridge was bare. Medical bills I paid when her insurance didn't cover it. Even bank statements showing transfers from my account to hers when she claimed she was struggling. I sat up in the bed, heart pounding now, not from sadness but from something else, clarity. They called me a leech while sitting on the very foundation I had built for them. Every scrap of security they had was patched together with pieces of me. They feasted on my sacrifices, and then they threw me away as though I had never given a thing. I pressed my palms to my eyes, forcing back the tears that tried to rise again. The ache in my chest started to shift, no longer just pain. It was sharper now, steadier, like iron heating in a forge. They thought I was weak because I stayed quiet, because I swallowed every insult, every dismissal, every theft. They mistook silence for surrender. The truth was sitting in that folder, waiting for me. Hard proof of every dollar, every sacrifice, every choice that kept them afloat while they spat on my name. I could show them, one by one, how deeply they owed me. And when the truth came out, they wouldn't just see me differently. They would regret every cruel word, every smirk, every laugh at my expense. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my coat and looked around the dingy motel room. The thin curtains and peeling wallpaper no longer mattered. Something inside me had changed. I wasn't just a cast-out daughter tonight. I was someone with the power to turn their world upside down. And I would. I stopped wasting time on feeling sorry and began working. First thing I did was make a list of everything I needed to prove. I wrote down dates, amounts, who owed what, and where each paper might be. Then I breathed, locked the door, and started digging through drawers, old envelopes, and a shoebox of receipts I had never thrown away. I pulled bank statements, one by one, and photocopied the pages that showed transfers to Colton's account and to Mom's. I found canceled checks with my signature and invoices with my name on them. Some papers were faded but legible. I printed them all and sorted them into neat stacks. Loans, medical bills, household payments, and small transfers I'd forgotten about. Each stack felt heavier than the last, but that weight was the truth I could use. Next, I hunted down contracts and written promises. There were text messages where Colton promised to repay me, and emails where he admitted the shop needed money. I made screenshots and printed them. I even found a mechanic's invoice from when I paid for parts for his shop. Every little bit added up into a picture that did not match the story they told at the table. I also remembered conversations where people had promised things out loud. I had reason to believe some promises were recorded. Old voice memos on my phone, an answering machine message, and a shaky recording I made once when Colton begged me on the phone. I transferred those files to my laptop and made copies. Hearing his voice on replay, saying the words that matched the papers, stung but helped me breathe steadier. Those recordings would be hard to argue with. Once I had the physical proof together, I called the only person I thought could help me make sense of it, Mr. Denton, my late father's lawyer. I didn't know him well now, but he had handled my father's affairs when he passed. He answered on the second ring, surprised but not unkind. When I told him the basics, he asked me to bring everything to his office. At his desk, Mr. Denton went through the documents slowly. He listened, asked questions, and then paused at a set of old trust papers. He frowned and said, "Margaret signed something here, and these assets were moved." He pulled up property records and bank transfers. Page after page showed that some of my father's assets had been shifted to Colton's name in the years after he died. The changes were real, and they were quiet. Hearing that felt like a blow. This was no longer only sharp words at a holiday meal. This was money and property taken without my knowledge. It was simple and ugly theft hidden behind polite smiles and family stories. My anger changed. It was no longer raw humiliation. It turned cold and hard. I thought of every dollar I had given, every late night, every promise accepted. Those things had a cost, and someone had moved the ledger without telling me. Mr. Denton explained options: a legal claim, a review of the estate, and possibly forcing an accounting of the assets. He also warned me it would be messy and painful. I listened, but my mind was already making lists: lawyers, filing dates, witnesses, copies of recordings. I would use the law to take back what was mine. I would also make sure everyone who had lied to me felt the truth press against. This plan would be twofold. First, legal justice to correct the theft. Second, a personal reckoning to reveal the full truth to the people who pretended not to see. I left the office with papers in my bag and a steady step under my feet. I felt angry, yes, but also certain. I was done letting them define my worth. The days that followed were filled with meetings, papers, and signatures. Mr. Denton guided me step by step, making sure every document was filed correctly. He was calm and steady, reminding me that the law worked slowly but firmly if you had the proof. And I had plenty. Together we filed claims showing the money I had given, the loans that were never repaid, and the property my mother had shifted without my knowledge. The most important piece was Colton's auto shop. On paper, it looked like his business alone, but the documents and messages I had kept showed a different truth. My money had kept the doors open. Without it, the shop would have collapsed years earlier. Denton explained that because of this, I could claim legal stake. The thought of it shook me. That shop had been used as proof of Colton's success, a family trophy. But it was built on my sacrifice. When the claims were filed, things started moving faster than I expected. Court notices were sent, financial accounts flagged. And then came the moment I didn't plan for but couldn't forget. Margaret was served her papers during Sunday service. I wasn't there, but I heard about it the same afternoon. Denton told me the server walked straight down the aisle while hymns were still being sung. Margaret accepted the envelope with a stiff hand, her face pale under the stained glass light. Whispers ran through the church pews as she shoved the papers into her purse. The congregation stared, confused, some leaning close to one another as the news spread from row to row. By the time the service ended, everyone knew she had been caught in something ugly. The effect rippled outward. By the end of the week, Colton's business accounts were frozen while the court reviewed the debts and claims. He tried to move money, but the orders stopped him cold. Without cash flow, his mechanics walked out, customers turned away, and the shop doors stayed locked. For the first time in years, the proud sign above his garage looked fragile. The silence from my family broke then. They started calling each other, pointing fingers, shouting blame. I heard from a neighbor that Margaret accused Colton of dragging her into this mess. Colton shouted back that she had pushed him to ask me for money in the first place. Renee, never one to stay quiet, told anyone who would listen that she had warned them I was trouble all along. Even Victor, usually quiet, stopped visiting them because the air in that house was so thick with shouting. Each of them scrambled to protect themselves, but none of them turned to me. They were too busy clawing at one another. And I let them. I stayed silent, letting the papers and the truth speak louder than anything I could say. What had been a united front against me at Christmas was now splintered. The cracks spread faster than I imagined. For the first time, it wasn't me standing alone. It was them. Word spread quickly once the papers were served and Colton's shop froze. At first, it was whispers, little pieces of the story carried from one person to another. Soon the whole family knew, and with the documents out in the open, no one could deny the truth anymore. The story of me being a leech didn't hold up against bank slips and signed promises. Relatives who had avoided me for years started calling, not with warmth, but with curiosity. They wanted to hear my side because the version Margaret had spun no longer fit. Uncle Harlan surprised me most. He came by one evening, his hat in his hands, looking tired. He admitted he had always known I was the one holding things together. He said he had stayed quiet because it was easier to go along with Margaret, but now he couldn't pretend anymore. His words were rough but honest, and I could see the guilt in his eyes. Then there were the lies Renee had told. For years she had whispered stories about me, painting me as someone untrustworthy, someone desperate. But old messages came to light, her gossip caught in writing. Screenshots of conversations where she bragged about making me look bad, and others where she twisted events into rumors. Once those texts circulated through the family, her sharp smile disappeared. Even people who once laughed at her jokes now avoided her. Victor reached out quietly, almost ashamed. He didn't make excuses. He only said that he felt trapped that night at the table, too afraid to go against the rest. He admitted he should have spoken up, and told me he was sorry for not doing it. His apology was soft, but it felt real. For the first time in a long time, I believed him. The Whitman family's clean image began to crumble. Neighbors who once admired Margaret's sharp clothes and Sunday manners now whispered about her behind their hands. Church friends no longer greeted her with smiles. Some crossed the street to avoid her altogether. The stories of what she had done, shifting assets, taking money, turning on her own daughter, spread through town. What she had built for years with polished words and fake charm collapsed in. I didn't gloat, but I noticed. Every time I passed someone who had once ignored me and now nodded with sympathy, it reminded me that the mask had fallen. Margaret was no longer the respected woman she pretended to be. She was seen for what she was. She grew more bitter as the walls closed in. Relatives stopped visiting, and her phone rang less. Even Colton, drowning in his own problems, couldn't defend her anymore. She sat alone in that big house, trapped by the silence she had once used against me. The power she held in her words was gone, and for the first time, she was the one left out. The case dragged on for months, but when it finally settled, I walked away with more than I had dared to hope. Part of Colton's business was handed over to me in the form of money owed, and when the payment came through, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. For the first time, I didn't have to hand over my paycheck to cover someone else's needs. The money was mine, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. I found a small house in a quiet town not far from where I had grown. It wasn't big or flashy, but it had a front porch, a warm kitchen, and a fireplace that filled the living room with a glow at night. When I walked through the empty rooms for the first time, I could almost hear my own voice echoing back at me, steady and strong. This place wasn't just shelter. It was mine, built from my struggle, my patience, and finally my victory. As the boxes were unpacked and the rooms took shape, I did something else I had put off for too long. I pulled out a brochure I had saved years ago for an art program. It was the same one Mom had once told me was a waste of time. My hands shook as I filled out the application, but when I pressed submit, I felt lighter. It wasn't about proving anything to her anymore. It was about finally giving myself permission to chase what I want. The first few weeks in that house were quiet, almost too quiet after years of chaos. But slowly, I began to meet people. A neighbor dropped off cookies one afternoon, and we ended up talking on the porch for hours. Another invited me to a small community gathering at the library, where I met others who shared their own stories of starting over. They weren't interested in my family's gossip. They cared about the person in front of them. Friendships began to form in simple ways, sharing meals, trading books, walking together in the evening. They weren't built on obligation or manipulation. They were built on kindness, trust, and laughter. It was strange at first, but healing. For once, I wasn't the one carrying everyone else's weight. I was just me, and that was enough. Late at night, I sometimes sat by the fire, thinking about everything that had happened. The anger that once burned so hot had cooled. I didn't regret standing up for myself. I didn't regret showing them the truth. But I realized the victory wasn't in watching them fall apart. The real victory was in standing tall after they tried to tear me down. The revenge had mattered, yes, but only as a door. Walking through it led me somewhere better, to peace, to strength, to a life that finally belonged to me. I wasn't the outcast at the table anymore. I was the woman who bought her own seat in the world. And for the first time, that was enough. It was a quiet afternoon when I heard the knock. The sound was slow, almost hesitant, nothing like the sharp raps of a delivery driver or a friendly neighbor. I opened the door, and there she was, Margaret, my mother. She looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders hunched, eyes tired, hair thinner and streaked with gray. The woman who once filled every room with her voice now seemed to barely hold herself up. She forced a weak smile and clutched her coat tighter around her. "Ilara," she said softly, almost pleading. I didn't know where else to go. For a moment, I just stared. Memories rushed back. The insults, the laughter around the dinner table, the cold silence as I was thrown out. My stomach tightened, but I stayed still, waiting. "Things have been hard," she continued. "Colton won't return my calls, and Renee's gone back to her parents. I don't have anyone left. But we're family. Family should stick together, no matter what." Her voice cracked on the last words, and her eyes glistened. I felt something shift inside me. A few months ago, those words would have broken me. They would have dragged me right back into the cycle of guilt and obligation. But now, standing in the doorway of my own home, I saw them for what they were. Empty, too late, too convenient. I kept my hand on the doorframe, steadying myself. "Family should have stuck together then," I said quietly. The image of that Christmas night flashed in my mind. Me at the table, surrounded by silence as she told me to get out. "When I needed you, you chose to humiliate me instead." She flinched, her lips pressing into a thin line, but she didn't argue. She didn't have the strength. She just stood there, shivering in the cold. For a heartbeat, I almost reached out. But then I remembered the years of being dismissed, the sacrifices erased, the names she called me when no one else was around. This wasn't about cruelty now. It was about truth. And the truth was, I didn't owe her anything anymore. I stepped back just enough to pull the door close. Not with anger, not with spite, but with finality. Her face disappeared behind the wood, and the house grew quiet again. I leaned against the door for a moment, breathing in the stillness, letting it settle inside me. Then I grabbed my keys from the counter. The sun was dipping low, painting the road in gold as I slid into my car. The engine purred, the tires rolled forward, and the world opened up in front of me. I wasn't carrying their weight anymore. I wasn't chasing their approval or drowning in their judgment. The only thing I carried now was my own freedom, and it was enough to take me anywhere I wanted to go. Do you think Alara finally found the justice she was searching for? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. A brand new story is on the way soon, so don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, drop a like, and share this with your friends and family. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. God bless, and I'll see you in the next one.